prepare to buy your first home, you will come across words that seem foreign or are being used in different contexts. To understand the lingo, here are many of the most common terms.
Completion date is the date when you expect the buyer and the seller to each have complied with their obligations and responsibilities under the agreement. The buyer's main obligation is to pay the money, the purchase price in full. The seller's main obligation is to deliver the completion documents so that the buyer is able to register the title in their name. If you had agreed on 90 days and say the seller is saying on day 60, the buyer can acknowledge and say, I hope or I expect to have the entire purchase price by the completion date. Once you've satisfied yourself, you go to the bank and pay. And you send a copy or take a copy of the transfer. Once the seller receives a copy or the seller's lawyer, they go to their bank and confirm. Once that has been done, they then undertake the exchange. Sometimes you will find the term vendor, that means the seller. Sometimes you find the term purchaser, that means buyer. Lease premium refers to the amount you will pay when the title that you're purchasing is a lease. What do I mean? That the government has said, you X so and so, we are granting to you this property for 50 years for you to use. So it is a lease because you have a defined period of time. And in exchange for using this property for 50 years, 99 years, you will pay us 5,000, 10,000, 2,000 shillings a year. At the beginning of every year, you remit to the government what we call land rent. So lease premium is when the title that is in that nature, I've been given by the government for 50 years, then I decide I'm selling to you. Maybe I've even used it for 5 years, then I'm selling the property. So in actual fact, I'm now selling to you the right to use that property from the government for 45 years because that is what is remaining since the government gave me a lease. The money that you are paying me for that transaction, for selling to you that what we want to call leasehold interest, that purchase money, we call it lease premium.
Once you are satisfied with the property and ready for the purchase, you will get a request to sign a document from the seller. This document is called a letter of offer. It is set to express the interest of the buyer in the property before any payments are done. It also contains the terms and conditions of the transaction, the purchase price, and the down payment. An offer letter should be signed by the lawyer and the seller with the help of their lawyer, who will act as the witnesses of the agreement. It is important to note that this letter is not a legal bound contract, but just a proof of document.
The letters of offer are normally given by the estate agents. In other words, that is a third party who is actually selling for the owner. It's the document going before the agreement for sale, and that is to show commitment. Normally, the estate agent will have the relevant documents to help you do the due diligence. Sometimes we have letters of offer where the estate agent says that if you do not go through with this transaction, then you will forfeit your deposit. And I find that irregular. Because mostly in the market, people will give a 10% deposit. So you need to be careful and consult with your advocate about the terms and conditions that you are binding yourself to at the letter of offer stage. The agreement for sale, however, outlines in detail the terms and conditions of the sale. This is the property. It's either a leasehold or a freehold. This is how much I'm selling. I'm allowing you to buy it by paying me a deposit. This property is charged to the bank or it is not charged to the bank. As the seller, this is my responsibility and obligation under this agreement. I will get these kinds of consents. So it's a more detailed document. If you as the buyer, you are ready to complete and the seller is not ready to complete, this is what you can do as a buyer. in terms of remedies. So it's a very substantial agreement. And the reason you do not want to bind yourself at the letter of offer stage is because you do not know the terms and conditions that are contained in the agreement for sale. You might find the person is actually saying, I am selling, but this property is a property I'm inheriting. So I'm in the process of getting the title.
A sale agreement protects the interest of both the buyer and the seller. It constitutes the terms and conditions of sale of a property by the seller to the buyer.
Agreement for sale is a critical document because it is the one that sets out or it outlines this is how the transaction will happen. In the sale agreement, of course, you want to know who are the parties. And then you need to know something very, very important. Which property or what property are we talking about? Mode of payment. Normally in agreements for sale for properties, people first pay a deposit and then they pay the balance. Is it possible for somebody to pay the entire amount at a go? Yes, it is possible, but we discourage it as lawyers. If the seller has had a loan from the bank, they need to get permission from the bank to sell that house. So that is why we normally have a mode of payment. You know, someone is paying a deposit to allow the seller to get all those documents I'm talking about. We normally give them one term, completion documents. Sometimes it could be I have a deposit, but I don't have the balance. And in that case, I'm going to my financial institution that has told me, yes, we shall lend you the money.
What happens if one party fails to honor the sales agreement?
Because there are cases like those where the seller, for reasons that maybe the family has refused, maybe the property was charged or had a loan, or there are challenges with the documentation. Maybe it was inherited property, he had not been given the title, or a caution has been put on the property. So there are those instances. And when they happen, the seller is supposed to return the deposit that had been paid by the buyer and to return it in full. But in some instances, the buyer has a right to go to court and get an order that forces the seller to finish the sale. That happens where, and this becomes very prevalent when you have changing market conditions. So for example, I approach you and we agree that I'm selling to you a property for 10 million. After we have agreed and we have signed the document, the sale agreement, the government announces that it is putting up a major development that is not too far from where that piece of land is. And that happens. Or there's a road that is going to be constructed. For example, the way you've put up expressways and the government has really done an excellent job with infrastructure, then suddenly the value of the property increases exponentially. And your neighbor tells you, by the way, I found a buyer, I'm selling mine for 15 because now there will be a road or a major development. Then you start looking for ways to frustrate the agreement so that you don't go through with that agreement and you can try and aim for more money. There are even some sellers who will be like, I want to return the money, oh, the family has refused. So there are some instances where when you have already signed that agreement, there are buyers who go to court and tell the court, I don't want my money back. What we agreed is that he would sell to me that piece of land. I think the piece of land is unique because XYZ, maybe the location, maybe it has some sentimental value, whatever it is. And if I take back the money, I cannot find another piece of land that is like this one. So issue an order to force the seller to complete this transaction.
This story is part of a series on www.mula.co.ke on home ownership. The next story will be about due diligence. See you soon.